Hi there, it's Natasha and thank you so much for joining me today. We have a really simple, fun technique that if you have any alcohol markers or alcohol inks, then you are ready to go. We are going to be colouring some acetate and embossing it and all sorts of fun things. And this is going to create some really stunning, striking, easy cards. So first of all, you don't have to start off with too much. I am going to be using some acetate sheets. These happen to be from Hero Arts. I'm also going to be using some vellum. I always use the Lawn Fawn vellum. This is my favorite kind because you can dry emboss it, you can heat emboss it, you can do all sorts with it. It's the perfect weight that I prefer. And I'm also going to be using some embossing folders. Any embossing folders are going to work for this. I'm going to stick with just one because that keeps things nice and simple. Now I'm going to cut down some little pieces of acetate and vellum. However, you can use any size you have. This is a good one for using up scraps. You can make it a strip, you can make it a square, you could make it a circle. Anything that you have, it might be a good case to use up some scraps of them. I happen to be using the Creative Expressions Fanciful Flowers embossing folder. As I said, you can use any. I'm going to pop my acetate in here, run it through like I would any normal piece of cardstock, and this is the result that we are going to get with that one. Then it is one of my most favorite things to do with vellum is to run it through with embossing folders. I love the result that you get even without doing anything to it. I mean, look how gorgeous it is just as is. Put that on a piece of cardstock, colored cardstock, black cardstock, craft cardstock, and I think it's an absolutely stunning background. We are going to take it a little bit further today, and as I said, you could just leave it here and that's gorgeous, but if we want to go a little further, I am going to cut these down so I get a couple of pieces out of this, but I am just going for that kind of look today. I just want a small little rectangle or something on the front of my card, but if you want more, then you can obviously do the whole background. You could do all sorts, just corners, you could do triangles. I mean, the opportunities are endless. So I have a couple of pieces of scrap paper down to protect my work surface, and I'm going to bring in a couple of alcohol inks. Now these ones are the Marabu alcohol inks. I got these from Joggles, and I started off, if you want to use a felt pad and kind of dab it in like this, then this is the look that you could get. So if you want it to be really, really subtle, that's what you could do. However, my preference is to go straight in with the alcohol ink and just let it kind of go into all of the nooks and crannies of your embossing folders. Now I do like dabbing a little bit of the excess off on my scrap paper. That's what it's kind of there for. And then down the other end, I'm going to go in with another color. You could just do one color all over. It doesn't matter which side of the acetate you do this in. I've tried both. Both end up looking pretty good. It's sort of an experiment thing. And of course, it depends on the pattern of your embossing folder as well. Sometimes I use a little bit of the felt tip to kind of blend them in a little bit more together. And then I kind of decided to add a little bit more blue down the bottom just so there wasn't such kind of a harsh immediate line. But I mean, the world is your oyster here. If you don't have the alcohol inks, then you can use alcohol markers, and then you could just use some blending solution as well to kind of make it run around. So you'd kind of just color on the back and then use the blending solution, spray it on or drip it on to get the color to kind of move around and not look quite so much like you've just colored on the back. But I just use straight in with the alcohol ink bottles, and I quite like that. It's a lot less fuss too. Now I have one done here. This is obviously the acetate, and I'm going to work on the vellum in just a second too. This works very similar, except for vellum is going to mute the color just a little bit. If you want it to be the bright color, then I suggest using the side that has the alcohol inks facing upwards on your project. And if you want it to be a little bit more dull and muted, then you would turn it over and use the other side. Now for this one, I am going to use it kind of more how the felt dauber was intended, but you could again just use anything to pop some alcohol inks on the back. Doesn't matter whether markers or bottles, and then that one is really, really simple. You can see that one side is kind of bright, and when I flip it over, it's a little bit more muted. So it depends what you're after. For the last one, I'm going to choose a couple of different colors, and this is kind of an orangey and a pink. I'm going to do basically the same technique. I go half and half, just with a few dots in there, and then start popping it on the back. I kind of more dot it around than kind of gliding it around, but anything is going to work. Now for the next part here, this is kind of optional, but just what I chose to do because I am out of gold cardstock, so I decided to pretty much make my own. Now I have a couple of tips here when it comes to this, so I'm going to start off with some just plain cardstock and some VersaMark sticky embossing ink. Then I have some gold embossing powder over there to the left, and I'm just going to gently kind of cover my panel here. This doesn't have to be perfect because I am die cutting out of it. If I want a really even look, I tend to do this trick where I kind of create the paper and then die cut out of it rather than die cutting the shapes and then embossing it. I find that less fiddly as well in the long run. So here I have one layer of the gold embossing powder over top, and it is a little bit tricky to see, but you can see that it's a little bit dented and kind of almost bumpy, not super smooth. I mean, it is smooth, but you can see those little dents. Now, one way I find to work those out, other than the fact that I just put my finger there in the hot embossing powder, so I have my little thumb-shaped print in there, covering that up. But another way to go about it is to add a second layer of embossing, and this will really smooth things out a lot. So when this is dry, make sure you don't go in too fast or too soon. Otherwise, if the embossing is still a little bit not dry, then you might ruin your embossing pad. But once it is dry enough, it only takes a few seconds. Then add another layer of the embossing ink, then pop your embossing powder over top, and as you can see there's a couple of little spots around the edges that aren't perfect. That's because I know that I will be die cutting out of this and it is going to melt really fast, not quite as fast as this is still sped up with my editing, but it melts much faster because it already has a layer of embossing underneath, and it's also much smoother. So to me it's worth it, but if you're not too worried and you're cutting out something really fine and detailed, then it probably doesn't need a second layer. I'm going to be using the Curvy leaves. This is a very much old favorite. This appears in many of my videos. This is just one of those staple leaf sets. I think I don't know how many times I've used this. 50 videos, 100 videos, I don't know. I've used this a lot. Anyway, I am going to die cut out a couple of these because at this point I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to go on there. I also cut some out of some plain white cardstock as well. Now when it comes to adhering down vellum and acetate, obviously we have to be a little bit careful about that. My best thing here, because my pieces are so small, my best option is to cover the entire backing. That way you can't see any of the adhesive through it because it's simply covering the whole thing. So this is really easy to do because it is a small piece. Otherwise you can cover it up by a little sentiment strip and hide the adhesive behind those. I could, if I had been really wanting to, hidden the adhesive behind some of the leaves that I had cut out up above to the right there. But honestly, I think with something this size, it's easier just to cover pretty much the majority of the whole thing. And then I'm pretty much going to do the same thing with the acetate. This one I'm going to pop down this way just so I can cut off that little bit of excess and save it as well. For both of my cards today, I'm keeping these my stock standard sizes, so I always have 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card bases, and I really like this kind of smaller focal point here. I think I am really enjoying this little focal point size, and nice to do a couple of cards like this. Now once I peel off the backing there, you can see, and pop it down onto that white card base, you can see all of the detail of the embossing and the alcohol ink and things really shine through. Now I am going to come in with the gold one on top of this, and I thought about layering up and kind of giving it a shadow and putting it down. It just looked messy and too much. There was sort of too much going on, and I think simple is good for this. So I like that look the best, and I'm going to just use some liquid glue. So I'm using the Ranger Multi-Medium in the matte finish. I buy it in the little bottles, and then I syringe it into these glue bottles that I'm using here. And I've never had these clog. I really love this glue. It dries completely clear, not shiny, so if anything smushes out the sides when I'm doing this technique, I know that I'm fine. It won't look like there's glue all over the place. I actually have a video as well on my channel called something about how to fill a glue bottle. If you just search that in YouTube, it'll be the first one that comes up, and it gives you a nice stress-free and mess-free way of filling up those little bottles. It's really easy if you just know a couple of little hacks. Then I have the Paper Rose All Occasions. These are, as you guys know, some of my favorites. They are so handy. It does change things when I don't have to kind of go about stamping out sentiments and things at the end of my card making. If it's not going to be kind of a focal point as such. I know that the sentiment is kind of a focal point, but if it's not, if your whole card is kind of not based around a big sentiment, like a big sentiment stamp or a big sentiment die, then these little pieces that I can cut out are just absolutely lifesavers when I'm just focusing on a background technique or something like that. So this one just says, wishing you a wonderful birthday. I think this one could be for a guy, a girl. I think it could be for anything. So I really like the simplicity of this, and yet all of that gorgeous texture and color and embossing. I love it. I love the shine from the acetate, everything. This one here is going to be with the Vellum, and with this one, just because it's a little bit more muted, I thought that the white curvy leaves was going to shine through perfectly. So actually I really like this one as well. It's definitely not quite as bright, and I chose to use it the alcohol ink side down, so it was that more muted kind of color. I did choose to use the two blue and green ones just so that you had kind of like a really nice comparison between acetate and vellum. Even though I really loved that pink and orange one, I thought that this would kind of give you a better comparison if you wanted to try out one or more of the techniques yourself. So I will have everything, all of the products that I've used in today's video that are still available. I will have them linked in the description box below this video in case you want to check them out. I think you could have most of the stuff in your stash if you have been crafting for any amount of time. So I'm sure that you could probably give it a go already. And I really look forward to seeing your results. And if you were inspired by this video, I would love to see your creations. And the best place to do that is always on our Facebook page. We have the most amazing supportive community over there. We are so lucky. It's called Come Crafting with Natasha on Facebook. I'll link that down below too, but thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope that you have enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!